staying in an irregular position, it doesn't matter how irregular you are free to come and register because he has given an amnesty. It means we will not deport the person, will not charge him for overstay. He will register provided he has entered Nigeria before his declaration, and that registration is done between now and 6 months. So that's the amnesty Mr. President has given. I'm glad this will give incentive to 4 categories of migrant. People who have entered legally into our territory, you enter as a visitor, and then you found yourself overstaying for a longer period. You can now come and register. You don't need to worry that on your way out we charge fees, because we charge fees. If you overstay, we charge you according to the period you overstay. Now, we will not charge you. Come and register, then you can leave. No problem. There are categories of people who also entered through illegal routes. You are aware Nigeria is a vast area of border. Even sometimes through the airport, it's possible for somebody to avoid checking, presenting before immigration officer. We know about them. So today, you are free to come and register without penalty. You'll be forgiven. We have categories of persons who are staying legally, but are doing illegal job. I give you an example. You are a wife of a managing director of a company who has the right to reside in Nigeria. So you accompany your husband. You decided to take up employment without the consent of the Controller General of Immigration Service. That person is staying illegally, because that person is doing job which has not been approved by the Controller General. That person can register. So this amnesty by Mr. President is to invite people who are in an irregular position to be regular.
You were talking about the borders earlier, and our borders, everybody knows Nigerian borders is porous. And some, like in the northeast now, where the border with Cameroon, Nigeria, and other countries, there are people who have moved into these areas, lived there for years, have children. Do they come out too to register? They're sort of assimilated into the system.
Absolutely.
Some of them cannot even be detected that they are not Nigerians. So are they being encouraged to come out to register and be part of the process?
During the election, this concluded election, we seized many voters' cards in thousands, and we give it back to INEC. Many people assume because they have stayed in our territory, probably you're a Hausa-speaking person, you are from Niger, you have stayed in Nigeria for many years, you just assume you're a Nigerian. It's not so. Or you're a Yoruba man from Ogun, you have entered Nigeria, stayed for many years, have children, you are a Nigerian, you are not. So this amnesty includes those people, even if you have a Nigerian passport. Even if you have a Nigerian passport, if you come to us and say, look, I have made a false declaration, I obtained a Nigerian passport, because it's an offense. We have been arresting, prosecuting people for having Nigerian passport while they have gotten fake document from local government. We will forgive you, because Mr. President has given the amnesty. So it includes those people who even got a passport, who are staying in our territory, who claim to be Nigerian. When they come and say, look, I am a citizen of Benin Republic. I want to declare that I got a Nigerian passport by mistake. We'll collect the passport. We'll allow him to go and get his national passport.
Controller General of Immigration, what rights and privileges are intended to be conferred by the e-registration and the presidential amnesty?
Oh, the right is that you have forgiven. Let me give you an example. If you stay for a period exceeding a period like, let's say, 1 month, you can pay a penalty of up to $1,000. That's a great incentive. So if we see you at the border, let's say today at Murtala Mohammed Airport, a Chinese man wants to leave Nigeria, and we find out that he has overstayed for a period of 30 days. We said your penalty is $2,000, for example. He said, no. There is an amnesty. Let me go back and register. We'll allow him to go and register and enjoy the amnesty and come and pass through free. But if he insists going, he will pay the penalty. So it's a great incentive for you to make yourself normal. In these days, we have been arresting many people at the airports who have been overstaying and they have to pay penalty. It will also give opportunity for you to make your life better if you are taking wrong employment. We have many families, even sometimes families of diplomats who are not supposed to work. When they work, we come across them, we consider them committing an offense. So police is a great incentive by Mr. President.
I'd like to repeat my question with regard to rights and privileges intended to be conferred. Will the e-registration and the presidential amnesty therefore entitle such a registrant to continuing stay?
That's absolutely what we're saying. If you are staying irregularly for 10 years, and you appear before the registration officer and say, look, I'm staying 10 years without papers, you will be forgiven for the period you have overstayed. You will be advised how to be normal and continue staying in Nigeria as a legal person. But if you refuse to do that until after the amnesty will come across you, you'll be deported.
Does that confer a right of citizenship?
No. Citizenship is different from residency. You have the right of residency. It's different from being a citizen of Nigeria. There are things that a Nigerian citizen can do that if non-Nigerian cannot do. He cannot contest election. He cannot be voted. There are some properties he cannot own. So it's a different issue. When you reside in a territory which is not your own, you are different from a national.
In other words, Comptroller General of Customs, you are saying that this is a right of residency, therefore there is a limitation as to what the rights and privileges of such an individual can be.
Every non-Nigerian staying in Nigeria has a limited right compared with a citizen of Nigeria. To give you an example, you cannot vote. You cannot be voted. Although in some countries, some people who are non-citizens who have stayed over a period of time, they're allowed to vote because it affects them as a right resident. They pay tax, they participate in governance, so they will be expected to participate in voting. But in Nigeria now, as a non-Nigerian, you cannot be voted, you cannot vote, you cannot take certain form of employment except approved. For example, you cannot be a citizen of UK. You come to Nigeria and open a restaurant without permission. Yes, you can open a special type of restaurant which the Minister of Interior approves the business model. But you cannot do certain jobs. So there is restriction for non-Nigerians.
Well, there have been speculations in some quarters, Comptroller, that at times the immigration officers turn a blind eye to this kind of, abuse of privileges by expatriate or the quota itself. So what are you doing to ensure that this new e-registration and expatriate quota does not continue now?
People should know the difference between expatriate quota and the individual rights to work. Expatriate quota is a grant given by Minister of Interior to a company to employ expatriate. That company can be purely Nigerian company, can be foreign company 100%, can be a joint venture. For example, a company can be allowed, like Julius Berger, to bring a financial controller because probably the share capital of the company is partly owned by foreign partners. So the Nigerian partners can also have another position. That position is not for individual, it's for the company. So at any time the company gets somebody, he can be any national, he can occupy that position. And that position has a requirement. That's expatriate quota. But there are people who can work without expatriate quota. Let me give you an example like our citizen in ECOWAS sub-region. Citizens in ECOWAS have the right to take up any employment after 90 days, but they too, they need permission. So if they stay over a period of 90 days now, we expect them to get this amnesty. You are working, you are pushing a trolley, you are doing megat, you are working in a restaurant. Yes, you have the right to be here for 90 days. After 90 days, you should seek permission of Comptroller General of Immigration to take up employment. I know there are a lot of abuses, but this is opportunity for everybody to correct it.
Okay, CG, thanks. We'll return to the issue of abuse of expatriate quota and other allied matters with regard to the e-registration. But let's bring in now the Chief of Mission of the International Organization for Migration. That's France Celestine, whom we earlier introduced. Of course, all around the world, migration is a hot item. We have seen what happens to young Africans, who are crossing the perilous seas to get into Europe. In the U.S., we have seen President Donald Trump over the weekend threatening to start grabbing people and deporting them right from the street. What is the IOM's observation with regard to migration issues in Nigeria?
Well, we, as the International Organization for Migration, work with all of our member states. And Nigeria happened to be one of our very strong member states. And I'm happy to be sitting next to the CGI, whom I think is such a visionary and how he's transformed Nigerian immigration service. So it made it a lot easier for IOM to work with Nigerian Immigration Service because he has the vision. He wants to implement. We simply provide the support. So in a country like Nigeria, and when you have an active CGI such as Mr. Babandedi, we have seen the way immigration and migration itself transform in Nigeria. So what I have worked in East Africa, I've worked in the Caribbean, I've covered quite a number of countries, and this is one of the most effective one that I've worked with. And I think the last few years working with Mr. Babandedi has been very fruitful. So when we have somebody in place like this, the evolution that we've seen, both from a training and also from a technology standpoint, is remarkable. The Nigerian Immigration Service has been quite effective in putting in place the Migration Information Data Analysis System, which it's a software that IOM provides to its member states to manage migration, to know who's coming, for how long, for what purpose. And we are working with Nigerian Immigration Service to install it at all the major border posts and all the major airports. I can give you some examples. Even in the Katsina area, within a few weeks of installing the MIDAS system, the Nigerian Immigration Service were able to stop 5 young girls from Edo State who were being trafficked outside of the country. So this symbiotic relationship that we have with the NIS has been good in protecting Nigerians, and also in terms of people being trafficked, reducing the level of smuggling that we see in the country, and also looking from the security side, protecting Nigeria in general. But so I've seen the trend in terms of people going north to Libya, and I'm pretty sure you know the numbers have drastically reduced from at one point 381,000 people crossing into Italy and Europe to what it is now today, less than 31,000. So there is the effort that is being made from different countries, but certainly what we've seen from Nigeria side is an important step to save lives and to make sure that when people migrate, they do so in a dignified and safe manner.
Well, fine, thanks. We're talking about Nigerians who are seeking to emigrate. My colleague Juma mentioned this, and indeed it's a notorious fact that Nigeria's borders aren't effectively policed to a large extent. What kind of support has the IOM rendered to the Immigration Service or to Nigeria in general with regard to regulating, controlling, or otherwise managing the huge influx of persons, from elsewhere into Nigeria itself?
Right. I mean, this is a really good question, because our efforts to work with the NIS has a whole of society approach that involves all of the MDAs. This is why the National Migration Policy was put in place to get all the MDAs together to see how we can have a comprehensive approach to migration management. So integrated border strategy, again, the CGIs have been leading this conversation. The NIS has been providing the leadership to all of the relevant ministries and also agencies, including customs. The NIS recently put together the national border strategy, which the CG can give you more detail about. What I've seen is what the NIS has done, putting all the pieces of the puzzle together to accomplish something. And the steps are gradual, and I think they are forward-looking. But in terms of what we have done, again, following the leadership of the NIS, because as an international organization, we follow our member states. We act at the behest of our member states. So following the leadership of the NIS, and I believe it was a few months ago, the CGI and I had a conversation about mobile Midas, getting the necessary equipment where the Nigerian Immigration Service can patrol its borders with this software that allows it to capture those who are coming in, even those who are going. And this was designed actually to look at the borders that are not physically manned. So you have the equipment with the trucks and the satellites to move around the borders. And this is something that we intend to put in place in the next few months. We sat down a few months ago, and the CG told me, okay, this is what I want. This is where we'd like to have them. And then we said, okay, we can certainly do it. So there is the migration, the national migration policy, the diaspora policy, the border strategy. There are a number of products that we've worked with such ministries of Interior, ministries of Labor, ministries of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and of course agencies like NIS, NAPTIP, and NCFRMI, to have a whole of, not only a whole of government approach, but also a whole of society approach, because migration itself is such a complex phenomenon. One set of policy may not be enough to address it. So we have to put a comprehensive approach, a multi-pronged approach to get it done.
Okay, thank you so much. I will now come into Matthias Essene, Head West Africa International Center for Migration Policy and Development. Migration is the word on everybody's lips across the world. Positive or negative, you know, people will have to talk about it. In Nigeria, security concerns has also pointed the infiltration of criminal elements into the country through these borders. So what is your agency doing to enlighten, to educate people on this movement, on how they should go about it? What are they supposed to do to go legally into another country from Nigeria? And those coming into Nigeria, criminal elements who pose are Nigerians. What are you doing to make sure that a lot of awareness is raised and these people are brought to book?
Okay, thank you very much. Just to start, the International Center for Migration Policy Development, ICMPD, it's a regional organization that is comprised of 17 member states, essentially all are Europeans. And just last December, we had the membership of Turkey and Malta, because these are two important countries, because they provide corridors for people who are migrating towards Europe. Now, having said that, I'd like to start my conversation by first of all trying to maybe for us to rethink the way we see migrants. You know, it's very convenient for people to kind of link criminality to migration. Now, if we assume that criminal elements filter into Nigeria as a result of the migration flow, that's one of the things that make the conversation very toxic, you know, because there is this presupposition that if something is done, it must not be one of us. It must be somebody else. The problem with that is when we begin to see some kind of problem with Nigerian migrants, for instance, in South Africa, who experience xenophobic attack, in the same breath, we are concerned and we try to see how we can engage and how the Nigerian migrant will be protected. Now, it's the same thing for us. When migrants come in, and we quickly forget and flip it over and think that criminal elements are featuring into Nigeria. The point I'm trying to make is, even if people are staying irregularly in your country, does not automatically make them criminals. I think we need to get that fact. And in terms of what we are doing, first of all, ICMPD in Nigeria, we are part of a consortium which involves, of course, even led by the International Organization for Migration, that's the IOM, and at some point, France was actually the program manager of the FMM project. We have the ILO in that consortium. We're supporting, first of all, the ECOWAS Commission and the ECOWAS member states in a variety of in different aspects of migration. But when it comes to giving out information regarding regular migration, in fact, that's one of the principle that drives ICMPD, because it's not enough for people to talk about the it's not enough for us to talk about the foes and the dangers of irregular migration without providing alternatives. You know, and the alternatives to create regular channel for people to migrate, because as it is, migration is inherently human.
Yes.
People will continue to migrate. Migration is a means of survival. Whether you are migrating internally or internationally, this is a reality. All we need to do is to manage it. Like France has just mentioned, what is most important is not to tell people not to migrate, not exactly, but actually to inform them that if they must migrate, they should migrate in dignity and go through legal channels.
All right, like Matthias has said, of course, we know that migration is a global phenomenon, and some of the more unsavory stories that we've heard, of course, those stories have often involved Africans trying to get into Europe or the Americas or elsewhere. Can we try to reduce this or narrow it down to the West African sub-region? Because that's part of the beach that you cover. How much of intra-West Africa migration do we see? Now, the perception is that Nigeria, being, of course, the largest economy on the African continent and with many more opportunities that others do not have, is a magnet for migrants. So against the background of the e-registration for irregular migrants, what is it that your data bank reveals with regard to the flow or outflow of migrants within the West African sub-region, taking advantage of the ECOWAS protocol on migration or movement of persons?
Absolutely. About 83% of the international migration flow in this region happen within the sub-region. So it means less than 20% actually go out. So that's to tell you the importance of the migration flow along the various corridors in West Africa. Just to start with, the registration of migrants is not something sublime. It's not something new. It's not something out of this world. It's something that countries do. But what has made the NIS initiative a little bit something to really cheer about is the fact that it's e-registration. So it means that people at their convenience and they have a 6-month period to do that, So that's just to simplify the migrant registration process for all class of migrants. But it's very important that we distinguish, as you have done, between community citizens who are citizens of other ECOWAS member states, and of course, again, third country migrants. Ordinarily, third country migrant, that means migrants who are out of the West African space, will require a visa to come to Nigeria, except that if Nigeria has a visa-free agreement with such a country. Otherwise, you require a visa, for instance. So that forms part of your documentation. So it is expected that immigration will already have that kind of data. Now, for West African migrants who do not require visas to come in, there are some form of documentations that you provide, for instance, the standard passports, But now there are some advancement in the implementation of the ECOWAS protocol and some new regulations that has also coming out, which we are all supporting. That includes the use of biometric ID card as a travel document. Because now, many a time when we talk about porous border, we get the impression, and I don't really like to say that our borders are porous, because if we understand the nature of this border, I don't think porosity is the right description of what it is. Our borders are contiguous. That is the reality, because porous border presupposes that you actually, first of all, have this barrier, a clear demarcation, and probably even a buffer zone. and perhaps out of incapacity or for whatever reason, or a breach, you know, you are not able, people violate those corridors that have been coded off. But what we see in Africa, and given our history, these borders are contiguous. You have even communities. I mean, I just give a very...
and there are countries without contiguous borders unless you have treacherous terrains, such as mountains and so on and so forth, all around the world.
Of course, we know, for instance, there are countries that are islands of their own, like Cabo Verde, do not have any land border, for instance. But ours is not just that it's a contiguous border, it's contiguous to the extent that cultures interact. The people across this border speak the same language. You know, these are people who have the same culture. I was just going to give an example of something, a place there's a Cambia district, it's in Sierra Leone, a community called Balamuya, shares, it's at the corridor with Guinea-Bissau, for instance. Now, we have a border post built by the European Union, a joint border post that facilitates, and they have very good practice. But just between the buffer zone, there is a building, there's a house. I have a photograph of it. I was there a couple of weeks ago. There is a building, you know, one part of it falls on the Sierra Leonean side, the other part of it falls on the Nigerian side. Now, how do you manage people who find themselves in such circumstances? You know, so that's why, for instance, the introduction of the ECOWAS National Biometric ID card will help if you use that as a travel document instead of using the standard passport, because that helps you to promote this integration that we're trying to, or we are all trying to follow.
Okay, but Matthias Senate, thank you very much. We'll return to you to explain further aspects of migration within the West African sub-region, as well as the IOM Chief of Mission, who is still with us here in the Abuja studios. Let's go over now to our Lagos Network Center. Dr. Ona Ehomo, of course, is a regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria. You've listened to all the issues that have been raised in the meantime by the guests here with us in the Lagos studios. First of all, from your perspective, is the immigrant e-registration process potentially a game changer in terms of proper identity management of migrants, and what are the likely security implications going forward?
Thank you very much, Honorable Kinsley, and thanks to all your guests for enlightening us about the immigration issues or migration issues in the sub-region and specifically in our country. Well, the e-migrant initiative, e-migrant project is a laudable one. Back in 2013, then Minister of Interior, Abba Moro, had said that they were going to start something of this nature. And like the CGI told us a few minutes ago, it was with the immigration regulation of 2017, signed by General Dambaza, that we were able to, he was duly empowered to now make this particular initiative. Now, in terms of the efficacy of the program, I think a big difficulty I have with it is the volunteer nature of it. I understand from what CGI said is to incentivize people. But I think if perhaps we could go out and do a little bit more enforcement, you know, we can get more collaboration, because Nigeria right now is facing a lot of security challenges. One of the goals, or the goals of the program is to curb the current insecurity. And of course, the narrative is that a lot of the kidnappers we have in the bush, a lot of the bandits in Zamfara State and in the Benin Guarik Trough, they are foreigners. They are from the sub-region. So, you know, this is, immigration is such a critical agency. And it's good that a very brilliant young man is heading that agency in the person of Babandede. But I think it needs to be empowered to do even more, because immigration is at the front line of protecting the nation from bad guys, not minding, talk in this room today that we shouldn't consider all migrants as bad people. Look, legitimate migrants get visas, and they come in properly, they obey the laws of the country. I am talking about, you know, people who pass through those 1,499 illegal and irregular border entry points that Mr. Moro spoke about in 2013, and which has been referenced by many other CGIs before Oga here. Now, Oga is, I'm sure, familiar with that concept also. So, you know, we have people who are coming in, and now we have people who are doing us harm because they want to come in, they want to rustle cattle and go across the border. They want to come in and kidnap Nigerians because they can get a lot of cash and whatever. I mean, that really bothers me. So I see the role of the immigration agency beyond just being another NIMSI that is providing ID cards to people or trying to interdict girls going out of Nigeria. I see that more as something for NAPTIP to do. But I see the role of the immigration agency as a frontline border agency to interdict the illegal in-migration of criminals and of people who want to come in here and do harm to Nigerians. I mean, we don't need to really wait for you know, bad guys to come in here and set this country on fire before we really take the fight to them or stop them from entering this country. That is really my concern. I think in terms of the Midas program that Mr. Celestine has talked about, that's a brilliant program. We can just go around and register people. But a lot of these guys have to be, they have to come in willingly to be registered. But I think what needs to happen is, one, we need to more firmly secure our borders. And then secondly, we need to go out and get more vigorous enforcement of this particular new registration policy, such that people will have no choice. It's not out of the kindness of their hearts. We will have no choice but to come in and register, and such that we know who is in Nigeria, and then we can also exclude the criminal elements that are among us.
All right, Dr. Onaiyehomu, thank you very much. We'll return to you, but let's bring in again the Comptroller General of Immigration, not so young a man, by the way, CGI. Well, Dr. Onaiyehomu has talked about his chief concern about this e-registration, that the volunteer nature of it might not make compulsion on the part of those, you know, who would like to regularize their residency status. What's your reaction to that first? And then we have other questions.
I think we need to commend his views that immigration is a key agency in terms of national security. But let me clear the air in terms of the understanding people have on the e-registration. The e-registration is compulsory. It's not voluntary. The act is very clear, the regulation is very clear, that if you don't register after 90 days when you enter Nigeria, you have committed an offense. Not only the migrant, but the person who provides accommodation for the migrant is a key person. I'll give you an example. You have a hotel, you provide accommodation, room for a migrant, the migrant stays for a period exceeding 90 days, the person didn't register, you are also responsible. Landlords, you give room, accommodation, room to a non-Nigerians, and you don't demand that whether he has registered with the immigration is an offense. So the offense is not only for Nigeria, for migrant, but also for people who provide accommodation. So we need to do a lot of engagement. We need to engage the civil society. We need to engage traditional rulers. We need to engage the landlords. We need to engage many people to get involved. So it's not voluntary. It's compulsory. And what we are saying is just incentive. The 6 months is only incentive Mr. President gave. It's a continuous process. We'll continue to register throughout life. But Mr. President just give incentive. I said, look, before we punished, before we deport, before we arrest, we give you the voluntary opportunity to register within these 6 months. So within these 6 months, nobody is an irregular migrant if he registers. But if you don't register after the 6 months, the enforcement will take place. So it's amnesty is given by Mr. President. And I hope people will seize the opportunity for this amnesty. Just also the providers of the accommodation for where migrant stays, and the migrant himself should enjoy this amnesty so that he can benefit from what Mr. President has given.
When did the amnesty period begin to run?
6 months.
When did it start to run?
12th of this month, and it will expire 12th of 6 months after.
Okay. Now, I'd like to return, CG, to the question again of rights and privileges, and link that up. Assuming I'm registered, as a migrant, I regularize, my residency, what does that entitle me to? Does it entitle me to hunt for a job in Nigeria, get employed? Or what? What does it entitle me to some of the services that ordinarily are available to citizens? I think this point is necessary for us to clarify it.
That is, the amnesty has a value. I want you to understand between the amnesty and the registration. The registration is a compulsory process for all migrants throughout their life. Any migrant, even after the 6 months amnesty, if the person enters Nigeria, intends to stay or stays for a period exceeding 90 days, that person will register. And if you register, we'll link you with a NIM number. Very interesting to note that we consulted all the security agencies, including National Identity Management Commission, who have the right to register any person who is a resident, even if it's not a Nigerian. So we said, don't worry. Don't look for the non-Nigerian, because we know the non-Nigerian better. Once this non-Nigerian register and submit his registration, we'll forward it to you online, and you will generate a NIN number. So this person will have one identity number, like in the way that we're doing with the e-passport. In the e-passport, the ones we roll, once you get the new passport, you'll be linked with a NIN number, and your NIN number is linked with your IBN number. So we're having one person that can be checked. It's a big strategy for national security. It's good for national development. It's good for our statistical issues. So the privilege is that with the time, after the 6 months, you will be asked about that number before you get any facility, before you get rent, before you get accommodations, before you get employment. But now we are saying that within the 6 months, you can even get job free. We won't give you any. Once you come to us and say, look, I've been staying in this country irregularly for 10 years. I want to get regularized. We allow you to get regularization, and we permit you to get a job. But if not, we'll remove you. You begin to seek for employment from outside. So whenever immigration officer arrests a person, and the person will be removed, he will be treated as if he's seeking to enter Nigeria for the first time. But now he has entered Nigeria, we give him the permission to look for a job. It will be granted within that 6 months. So 6 months is a great opportunity. You can show yourself, register, and continue working.
Well, I don't know. Well, I'm sure that Nigerians will be interested in seeking further clarification of this. As for those who have lived outside this country, you would know that you have to have a work permit. Yes. If you can have your right of entry, or visa for entry, but for you to be able to work, you must have a work permit. Is there a linkage with the Ministry of Labour with regard to this? Because there have been complaints, again, you can tie this up to expatriate quota, of jobs that Nigerians are qualified to do and are available to do, being snapped up by foreigners.
The job done by members of the ECOWAS region is a job Nigerians are doing better elsewhere. I want Nigerians to understand this very well. Our ECOWAS agreement says that if you enter our territory, any of the members said, we are citizens of ECOWAS. In addition to our citizenship in Nigeria, a Nigerian is a citizen of ECOWAS. So if an ECOWAS citizen enters Nigeria, spend a period of 90 days without any question, provided that person enters through a recognized port and enters with a travel document, that person is entitled to remain in Nigeria. But when he wants to take up employment, he has to seek permission from Control General, and there's no limit. He can be a cleaner, he can open a restaurant. People talk about those foreigners taking out their job. Do you know the number of Nigerians in other territories? If you go to Ghana, if you go to even Niger, if you go to all the West Coast, you'll be shocked of the power of Nigerians controlling those economies. So I don't want people to be looking inward only. You should think global, act local. We are great nations. We have a population that in the next decade will be the 3rd country in the world. We must export our labor and our population. So don't be ethnocentric and think only of Nigeria. It's of great benefit that Nigerians are doing well. You will be shocked. Just go to Niger. The Niger you think is our neighbor, poor country. A lot of Nigerians have huge hotels, huge investment in Nigeria. So don't think only locally in Nigeria. But also, the expatriates that are here, there is nobody allowed to take up employment without permission of the Control General Immigration Service. And there are 3 ways to do it. Either through a quota. If the company has an expatriate quota given by the ministry, you can get resident permit. Or if you are working in a free zone is an area where business is allowed to take place without expatriate quota, we can give you resident permit. Or if you are a citizen of a country that is ECOWAS, you can get a permit. So permit is given also in labor. And I don't want Nigerians to be worried. There are a lot of value. If a Nigerian pushes a trolley in the market or cleans a gutter, you think it is not economic benefit to Nigeria? A Nigerian might be having a hotel in Niger, which will give him a job for 50 people or 100 people. So please let us think big. Let us not think only as a small country, a great country who will export also labor.
I'm sure, Comptroller General, I'm sure the Nigerian Labour Congress and Trade Union Congress will be in a better position to respond to these points that you have raised, that if you get a foreigner to do this job, then perhaps ignore a Nigerian, or we'll have a bigger
I didn't say that.
But that's the implication of what you are saying.
Exactly.
All right, that's the necessary implication. But to return to the point you made, you go to other West African countries, you find Nigerians, who are in business and so on and so forth. There have been recent reports of the discrimination against Nigerians in certain West African countries. Ghana, for instance, there are also discriminated taxes against Nigerians in some of those locations. And their businesses have been required to pay all kinds of levies with threats of closure.
We are, in Ghana in particular, we are tackling Ghana very well. You'll be surprised that if Ghana deports, we deport. And we are talking with Ghana very well. We have done, last 2 months, the Ghanaian Controller General came to Nigerian Immigration Service passing out parade, and he was there. So we are in the position to retaliate anybody who misbehaves against our country. And Foreign Affairs is the lead agency to guide us to do that. But to avoid that crisis, let me tell you, there is value for every citizen to consider himself capable of participating in an economy which is unprotected. I'm worried that somebody is worried that somebody is pushing a trolley in the market, but you don't understand that there is somebody who invested heavily. Look, we must be very careful. If we want to protect Nigerians in South Africa, we must protect migrants in Nigeria. That's simple. If Nigerians are discriminated in South Africa, we are fighting against that. We must. If I have, I will not do the registration. We want to have. Nobody has its mate of irregular people in his territory. But one thing is very clear, that you talk about porous borders, but we talk of contiguous borders. There are a lot of people who are in our territory who have no documentation. After this exercise, we will have thousands of people documented. With the amnesty, it will give us benefit. People will see it, why do we take that risk? But I'm sure we're going to get a large number of people who are not normal, who are not staying regularly, who will be registered. But let me tell you, this registration is for persons who are regular and irregular. It's not only for irregular people. It's for everybody. Anybody who enters Nigeria after, say, 90 days is expected to register, except is an exempted person, like diplomats. Diplomats are exempted. But if you are not exempted, you must register. So we'll be able to have a better statistic after this documentation.
Let's talk about SEPAC, the upward review of the combined expatriate resident permit and alien card. It was set up to check the abuse of expatriate quota and develop local content. Is that working?
Well, I know the increase, many companies cried about the increase of the fee. As operative,
it did go down well with most expatriates.
I also cried as
$2,000.
Yes, as a Controller General, I also cried to my ministry. But the responsibility to increase fees rests with the Minister of Interior. That's the power given to the Minister of Interior. And I think he has seen the value of increase in terms of revenue for government. But as an operative, I have also raised an alarm. And we have received a lot of complaints from expatriates. That $2,000 is too much. Imagine they retaliate against Nigerians elsewhere. I always look at what will happen to Nigerians in other territory. You charge expatriate $2,000, and if other countries decide to charge $2,000, let's say the Americans charge Nigerians $2,000 for residency, it will be a huge issue for Nigerians. So I know it's too high, but government is looking at it in terms of investment and benefit from this expatriate. I hope so, that it will be reviewed, because I have written memos for the review, and I hope when it is reviewed, it will serve better for the migrants.
All right, Controller General of Immigration, thank you very much. Just quickly, because we'll take a short break presently, but Matthias Essene, back to West Africa and the issue of migration, Dr. Onai Homo raised the issue, the adjunct of security, and the fact that Nigeria has, suffered on account of, in his words, the bad guys who are slithering in and out of the country and causing mayhem and havoc around the axis of Zamfara and the contiguous locations. And back to the question I asked earlier, what do we know, at least from your organization, in terms of the influx of these bad guys, persons who are harming our security, harming our economy, and making life unbearable?
Okay. Now, first of all, I completely understand the point that Dr. Homo was making, because many a time to pursue national interest is not a bad thing itself. So when we have this kind of conversation, you see people talk about there is this nationalistic tendency to protect what is of interest to you. Having said that, now it is difficult to profile the migrant population, for instance, as criminal element, because again, I don't think, apart maybe there are intelligence reports that I'm not aware of, there's nothing to indicate that the people who are involved in criminality in Nigeria are necessarily migrants. I think it's important we separate criminality from migration so that the conversation becomes less tossy, because like the CJ have said, we do have Nigerians in other parts of the world. Now, coming to the northeast axis and of course the northwest, like in Zamfara and all that, if there are bandits causing mayhem, the proper thing to do is to arrest them, and it's not necessarily to profile them as migrant, because that creates some kind of impression in people's mind, whereby you begin to scapegoat, other population because they are different from you. I have heard, just this quick point, I've heard at a point that Nigerians love life so much, it's difficult for a Nigerian to commit suicide. That Nigerians don't engage in suicide bombing, that people who do suicide bombing are foreigners. And I tried to interrogate the person who made that assertion if we had any evidence. But today we see that people are committing suicide. So
committing suicide is a different issue. I just, very quickly, because Dr. Onai Homo is a security consultant, and we've had him on Good Morning Nigeria discussing various security issues. Dr. Onai Homo, Matthias Essena here is saying that, look, segregate issues of migration from criminality, deal with criminality strictly. But earlier you were talking about the fact that there appears to be some linkage between some of the bad guys who are flowing in from elsewhere in the West African sub-region into parts of Nigeria, but are causing mayhem. What's your reaction to what he said?
Thank you very much, Honorable Kingsley. I think we have to keep our knowledge. Well, first, I think the gentleman from IOM said, let's use a whole society approach toward the issue of migration. I think he said that, and that's very useful. And whole society approach should not only relate to just immigration agency and these other, let's say, NAPTIP, IOM, ICMPD. It should also relate to what is coming out of the police agencies and the intelligence agencies. Because right now we have a big problem of terrorism in this country. Now, one of the clearly stated goals of this new initiative, the e-registration, is to combat insecurity. Now, another goal of this e-registration is national development. Now, those two are antithetical, because if you have insecurity, you cannot really have good national development going on at the same time. So to achieve those two goals, we have to we'll have to kind of put it together. Now, what is my evidence? I think the question that is being asked here is, what is the evidence that it is foreigners that are coming in, at least for the most part? Well, look, I just concluded a big study recently from some granting agency, and we were looking at well, first of all, we looked at the Sahelian crisis. That's the terrorism and human trafficking, weapons trafficking going on in that whole Sahelian zone. Now, we also look at active profiling. We have to
resident permit here in Nigeria. We have some tweets here, and the first tweet is from Mose. He says, Nigeria must control immigrants. I like the idea by the immigration boss. In Nigeria is becoming unbearable.
Chris Simeon has this tweet.
Our regular Festivus Akimboyewa tweets, registration of immigrants in Nigeria is good, but there are legitimate moral questions around registration of those who have lived in Nigeria for many years and have made positive contribution to our development. FG should tell us what will happen to those who fail to register.
Law Alpha C, registration of immigrants without thorough investigation of the true originality and purpose of immigration will only lead Nigeria into more problems, especially now that insecurity is rife.
Obama Bo White tweets, please can the controller explain why the fees advised for passport has been 20,000 for 5 years, and yet when you go to the passport office, they insist on you paying 35,000 in almost all the states of the Federation. Again, with just 5,000 naira bribe, miscreants find their way into Nigeria.
Musa Hadeja tweets, Nigerians should give maximum support to officers responsible for the exercise. That's to say, especially the traditional rulers in rural areas, by reporting new faces for easy identification, registration, or repatriation if necessary.
And A. Modibo tweets, as the largest economy in Africa and the major business hub in West Africa, Nigeria has huge inward foreign investment, which comes with the attendant immigration issues surrounding employment of expatriates. In this regard, there has been a lot of negative publicity on the management of migrants in Nigeria over the years, with some people alleging laxity in controlling the influx of migrants into Nigeria. Again, our border managers should think the safety of the country first and shun corrupt practices. I think that's...
Those are the tweets that we have. Yeah. I know that the IOM Chief of Mission has been itching to respond earlier, Franz Celestin, so let's get your thoughts.
Yes, so there are a number of points that my colleagues here have brought up that I wanted to talk about. And I agree with Matthias that we should not criminalize migration, because there are a lot of cases where, and it happens in many different countries around the world, where whenever something happens, migrants are the first one to point to. And the fact is, and when you look at the data, that is not the case. We have actually flow monitoring points across West Africa. IOM has the displacement tracking matrix. We actually have a pretty good understanding on who's moving and where. And this is why I have to back up Matthias from what he said before. 90% of those who migrate, the West African citizens who decide to migrate, they do so within the West African space. And that's because of the 1979 protocol. And I have to point out what CGI said. There's the principle of reciprocity. And I love the fact that he's thinking of, okay, whatever I do here may be done to Nigerians abroad. And this is why I think the CGI is such a brilliant person. He is looking at what can happen to a Nigerian in the far-flung corners of the world if I do something to somebody here. The principle of reciprocity is real within the international system. And so as policymakers, we need to think of what will happen if we do something here. They said for every action, there's a reaction. And it's like a balloon. You squeeze here, something will inflate here. Having visionaries like Mr. Babandari thinking beyond just the borders of Nigeria is quite important. And looking at what we do as IOM, and this is why bringing our global practice together is important. I can tell you this, like the people that are moving across Nigeria, we have flow monitoring points in Katsina, we have flow monitoring points in Kano. We know on average how many people are moving. There are some cases where we were finding like 600 people crossing going outside of the country per day in Kano, 625. So the data is there. those who are moving within the ECOWAS space is important. And then the ECOWAS 79 protocol provide that the ECOWAS citizens the space to move. Now, having the necessary data to manage that, and this is where the e-registration is important. And this is why the amnesty from His Excellency is important, Mr. President, is that it allows the Nigerian Immigration Service to have a proper account of who's here. Even if you don't get everybody who's here irregularly registered, but that's better than zero. And I've seen it in action. We were there on the 12th. I see how it works. And we have worked with the Nigerian Immigration Service to test it. It was not just here, but it was also, I believe it was tested in Calabar. But the immigration, the NIS has 42 such points throughout the country where people can go and register. It will give a proper look. And like the CGI said, Nigeria will soon be the third largest country in the world. And there are quite a number of Nigerians migrating outside of the country. We need to think about them. We need to make sure, like, if something is happening to them and we speak up, they don't call us hypocrites.
Well, that's right. Francis Celestine, thank you very much. But tie all of this by way of response to the points also articulated by Dr. Onai Ekhomu in our Lagos network studios. Mm-hmm. Nigeria, before now, had little qualms about people moving across borders. I mean, there was always the sense of artificiality of our borders arising from the 1884 to 1885 Berlin Conference, which balkanized the African continent, and so on and so forth. But as Onai Ekhomu has explained, you have something like a molten lava, you know, flowing from other parts of West Africa into Nigeria, and it recognizes the crucial role of immigration in building the dike, as it were, or ensuring that we have proper border security. From the IOM point of view, in terms also of profiling and therefore helping the country's security, now this is very crucial. What is it that is required to be done in terms of, look, if skilled persons want to come in, let them come. Harmless persons want to come in, I'm sure Nigerians will say you are welcome. But when you have the danger, as I said, molten lava, you know what that means.
Right,
you know?
Of course.
So,
no, but good point. And I think that's what all of the security services are there for. And the NIS as a frontline agency has that burden of you know, providing that the security for the country. I mean, with a workforce, and I stand to be corrected by the CGI, of 26,000 people, that is a formidable force that is being put in place. Now, let's look at the progress that have been made by NIS and working with IOM, and let's look at the specific you know, issues. For example, the border strategy, which NIS recently put in place. This is the guidepost that all NIS officials would use to protect the border, because that it plugs into an umbrella that you know the Nigerian government creates, so that all of the agencies, the concerned agencies, can plug into, with NIS leading this conversation. So, looking at security concern, of course, as IOM, we don't want to see the bad guys come in. We want to work with all of the Nigerian MDAs, and especially our primary partner, the NIS, to make sure that these bad guys stay out of the country. We want to make migration for the benefit of all. And you cannot, migration cannot benefit people if those who have nefarious intention are coming in. This is why we have MIDES. This is why NIS has all the different products, the technology that they're putting in place. And the foreigners registration is one key aspect of it. And the mobile MIDES also will give the NIS the necessary tool to track and get those who are coming and trying to come irregularly. So that, again, going back to my whole of society approach and whole of government approach, requires everybody to input. And this is why I like the tweet from one of the viewers here saying, let's get the traditional leaders involved. Let's get the local population involved. If somebody is coming and that person is not coming from the proper, okay, let's work with them. Churches, mosques, everybody. That's why it's a whole of society approach.
All right. Thank you very much, Franz Celestine. Just the last set of tweets that we'll be taking on this occasion, we'll go through them very quickly. Ozode, Chukwuebuka, all immigrants entering Nigeria must be profiled and duly registered. We must not leave our borders unchecked.
And Josephat Ukachi tweets, is there any stiff penalty for those immigrants that fail to register? If there is, what are these penalties?
Now, Ibrahim Tudu tweets, two tweets there. I'll take one of them and Jumel will take the other. The Comptroller General of Immigration. Now, this e-registration is not well known to the public. Almost nothing is happening at the border towns and states. Your agency must collaborate with CSOs and communities to pass information. You can't do this work silently. Immigration is now tied to insecurity in the country. The borders are at the center of the issue and the Immigration Service at the center of it all. They must sit up.
And Ibrahim Tudu still tweets, if the U.S. is struggling with borders, migrants, and drug trafficking, we can't just be playing good Samaritans and Democrats in Nigeria with our borders looked by. Our borders should have been closed temporarily for the registration.
All right. We'll get the closing thoughts from Dr. Onoye Homo and then return to the Comptroller General of Immigration. Dr. Onoye Homo, your perspective, just before we call it today, on the program today, in terms of the security implications and what we need to get right, data capture, ID management, for purposes of controlling crimes, whether of immigrants or of locals.
Thank you very much, sir. I think the most important thing here is to ensure that we are able to register enough people to make this data worthwhile, such that we are not relying on anecdotal data. Like the CGI said, we don't have the population of migrants, whether legal or illegal migrants in the country right now, and that is troubling. So we need to get that kind of information. So what are the things that can challenge this system and what will happen? Well, first of all, we'll have to ensure that we have good information, protection of information assets. That's good computer security with it. We'll have to ensure that, there are no unethical or sharp practices going on, at the registration points. And then the most important thing is we have to prove the identity of the registrants. Those people coming to register, they must prove the identity. Because you can't just come and say, oh, I'm a Nigerian, register me. It could be a fake out. Maybe the guy is from Mali or from somewhere else and probably has some kind of sinister motive. So I think this thing about proof of identity is also important in immigration enforcement within this country here, within our own national borders. Because at some point on 12th of January 2020, this program will flux, it will elapse. Now, what happens thereafter? I expect that immigration personnel will go and get people to prove their identities in order to say who they really are and whether they are registered or not or what have you. But I think there are challenges here, and we need to look at cost-effectiveness measures such that this program will achieve the goal, policy goals for which it's designed.
All right, Dr. Onoye Homo, thanks. Very quickly, CGI, let's get your closing thoughts and response to some of the issues that have been raised by the other guests, plus the tweets.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to say that registration will continue after the expiry of the amnesty. The amnesty only allows people to register without penalty. So after the expiry of the registration in January 2020, the amnesty registration will continue throughout. Anybody who enters Nigeria after 90 days will continue to register. We will engage. I like to commend all the tweets and the comments from Doctor that we will continue to engage civil society. We want to even include and talk to governors, traditional rulers, so they can buy in this project. I entirely agree with you that a safe border is a safe nation, and that what we do also affects security. That's why in our border policy we target three things. That a border management are three things: national security, second, commerce, It's a route for commerce interaction. And also human rights issues. So people should not see a militarized border issues with the guns, and we want people to trade because we are brothers to one another. But we are not going to build walls across our borders. Walls cannot solve the problem. We'll continue to respect human rights. We'll continue to do the right thing. And thanks for the tweet about corruption. We are doing our best. That's why Mr. President, when he approved the passport reform, he said, you must fight corruption. That's why we opened a passport processing center as a model where you can enter and pay nothing. Pay the fees only.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comptroller General, Nigeria Immigration Service, Mohammed Babadede. It's been a pleasure having an in-depth discussion with you on this topic. We also thank the Nigerian Chief of Mission International Office of Migration, Franz Celestin. Thank you so much for your input. And Matthias Asene, Head, West Africa International Center for Migration Policy and Development. It's been a pleasure.
I'm not the head, I'm the National Project Officer.
Okay, National Project Officer. And Mr. Ona Ekyomo, a security expert from Lagos. Thank you so much for your contribution on Good Morning Nigeria today. Kingsley?
All right, of course, that does it for us on the program. Of course, that does it for us on the program today. We'd like to thank you for tuning in. We're back tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, do enjoy the rest of your day. My name is Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Juma Yusuf. Thanks so much for spending your morning with us.